discipline discussions happening in IDB with PAT. We'll wait till Michelle gets here. So why don't we start with the liability for employees of the district, which is an amendment to the to policy 5.50.020. Do you want to walk through, Liz, the proposed amendments to this? This is a carryover from last time. I'm sorry, Jackson, were you part of the committee discussions about this? Or, okay, great. So
I'll just give an overview, and then I don't know that we need to go line by line, but so this is like Julia said, picking up where the work left off last spring, but pivoting just a little bit. As we left the committee discussion in the spring, there was a conversation about the scope of this additional defense or indemnification commitment that the district would make for his employees, and which positions or classification of employees might be eligible. The state statute and the current policy provides for defense in tort claim actions, which is longstanding and very, very standard. After talking with Julia and figuring something is better than perhaps everything that's not perfect, like let's start to solve the problem that originally started this discussion, which was what to do when in-house attorneys who are employees of the district are named in administrative proceedings that are not included in the current policy of the Tort Claims Act. And that arises not from misconduct, but from just executing their jobs as attorneys for the district, and that there has been some history over multiple years of that happening. And so this proposal is to authorize the defense and indemnification under certain circumstances with a cap over which approval from the board would be required. So it has some guardrails and it has some lanes. I think it's $25,000.
Which would be on the high end.
Which would be on the high end. So the history of these types of things, as best I can discern from what I have seen and what I've learned from what happened before I got here, is that most of these are kicked out very quickly after the first layer of review. But that first layer of review, most of these are with the Oregon State Bar, is still not inexpensive. About $10,000 just to get through that without any layers. So the $25,000 cap is probably rarely going to be exceeded and would be the subject of some conversation. The way this is drafted gives sole discretion to the district about assess whether this meets the qualification of no misconduct attorney in-house employed attorney doing their job. So I think all the discretion lies with the district in making that determination. I think it's an important move, though, for the hiring and retention of attorneys to work here, given the history that we've seen over time. So there also are some updates of language in the first part of the policy, the sections 1 through 4, just to tighten it and clean it. The policy itself had been last amended in 1984, so those are not to change the substance of the and decide it's covered by statute. RS 30.275, I think it is, requires the district to provide that tort claims defense anyway. So try not to get too wonky about that. Being sufficiently detailed on the purpose without delving into the wonky licensing of attorneys and the state bar proceedings, but.
And then if it turns out that there is actually there is misconduct, that the district wouldn't cover representation.
That's right, and the district can provide the defense subject to repayment if it's ultimately determined. But misconduct. There was misconduct.
Bailey or Jackson, do you have questions or comments or?
Just one question following up on what you just said. So if we do pay in advance and there was misconduct, they'd have to refund the money that we advanced.
There would be a written agreement. So the district might have to enforce it. I mean, and if there's misconduct on the part of your attorney, there may be other implications in their position here. There may be, I think of one example in the last 4 years where the allegation was made that I think would fall under this part of the policy, that the attorney was simply doing their job and a parent was very angry at the district's decision, having interacted with the legal, not the individual conduct, but the decision, and invoked this. And then in the course of that, the state bar discovered something else that was unrelated. And I would assume that the district would not pay for that other thing that the state bar discovered, but would have paid for the initial allegation and investigation and response that would have resulted from just doing your job actions. So they could have some complexity, but I think the policy is built to give all flexibility and discretion to the district to not get stuck paying for something that was either misconduct or really unrelated to the execution of your job duties as an employed attorney of the district.
Okay. And then, sorry, for the 25,000, you said it's probably at the high end, it's usually 10,000. How did we kind of reach the 25,000?
And it's a nice even number that requires you not to go to the bar. Looking at like the simple first round dismissed at the first opportunity, if there were any complexity to that or it required some additional inquiry, the way those work is generally that first intake. If there's anything where they require additional further investigation, you might go to the second layer. And this is trying to contemplate. That doesn't necessarily mean misconduct. That just means more response. And
Yeah,
so it's to get to that second. That's how I think about that 25.
Okay.
So how I thought of the 25 also was, so if it's the 10, like that's pretty routine and doesn't require lower risk for the district and the board doesn't need to know. If you are getting into the cost of defense is a higher amount, that it implies there could be greater risk to the district and the board should know about it.
Makes sense.
Anything else? Are we ready?
I would say that there's some other jurisdictions. I wouldn't say this is a uniform practice among public entities. The dynamic that this addresses is not unique to PPS, and there are some other jurisdictions. In fact, I worked with the former in-house general counsel at U of O who had a similar, we modeled some of this language from that institution. That's fine.
Are we ready to move it?
That seems pretty,
With the recommendation to the board?
yeah.
We talked about it a lot last year too. So.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have this on the next board meeting's agenda as a first reading.
Excellent.
All right, the next hopefully easy thing is the rescissions. And what I'd like to do is, just so we have it on the record, that if, assuming Liz, you're doing this, that you just the policy number and the title with the rationale for the rescission. And then as we talked about, if we end up, there's a reason to have a longer discussion or more questions, we probably would take the next one, so.
Yes.
Or find out what the questions are so that we're prepared to.
Yes.
Okay. I will play Mary Kate. She's going to finish since she's the actress and I'm not. I won't be as charming or as witty as Mary is, so I think we've all worked on these together. So the first policy number, 2.10.020, concept of administration. It's some of these it's hard to describe. It doesn't, if you weren't, I'm not sure what guidance this provides. It's not that it's not that you don't want to say that members of administrative staff shouldn't perform their duties and responsibilities with the highest levels of competence, but it's not a policy that gives guidance to anyone. I don't think anyone's going to go look up and say, I wonder how I should behave. I better check the policy on the concept of administration. So I think in the overarching goal of trying to prune our policy manual, which is quite large, so that people can find information that they need to make good decisions, these kinds of values or sentiments that don't necessarily rise to policy levels or that are already, how the district is organized between board and staff is also in statute, and there are other places to get that information. And again, we just don't think many people are relying on this policy. So that's why that was the first nomination. The second one, 3.10.020, additional building administration personnel. There's a whole staffing process that is approved by the board as part of the budget process, and this seems to be unnecessary. The next one, yes,
Before you go next. Will you make sure that Guadalupe is okay with getting rid of this?
yes,
Okay.
I will. Yes.
Maybe
Okay.
before you move to the next one, Ailey or Jackson, do you have any questions or issues with rescinding it?
It kind of seems obvious, the larger the school is, the more administrative support they would have. Yes.
That's the obvious test.
Well, I mean, if we approve it every year through the budget anyways, as well.
3.30.050, visitors to buildings. Again, this language encourages a practice. We think visitors to buildings is great. It doesn't need to be it's not really a
Not a
policy
policy.
statement, and it's not helpful, and we have lots of ways to express this support. So,
Just when we prepare the report on why we're recommending rescinding,
yes.
on this particular one, I'd like to start with the district welcomes all visitors.
Absolutely,
We don't need a policy
absolutely.
telling us to do it though.
Yes.
I just don't want people to think like, they're getting rid of the visitors to schools policy.
Particularly in a pandemic where there are limitations on visitors right now, so I think it's important to make that
Clear that
the
this is
distinction.
Any issues, Ailey or Jackson?
Don't we have another policy on like background checks for visitors as well?
I don't know if it's an AD or a policy, but we do, for volunteers,
Volunteers.
we do a background check.
There's gonna be more of these coming, so.
Yes. Okay. So the next one is 5.20.020, certification. These are for represented parties, and these are covered in statutes and or collective bargaining agreements. Again, you'll see all of these, the last four were all amended in 2002. So we do require compliance with state law and all standards that are imposed by TSBC or otherwise. I mean, these are, again, requirements that are elsewhere that I doubt people are looking to see. I don't think the policy is where they go for that guidance. And the last one,
Anyway, we spoke for
yes, I'm sorry. I keep doing
Ailey,
that.
Jackson, anything?
No,
I think same with the visitors, just making it clear we still are hiring certified teachers, we're not getting rid of certification.
Yes, I think that's right. And compliance with law is exceedingly important in table stakes.
Yep.
Decision.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get in a mode of like, yeah, this is so obvious, but I do think like on a piece of paper, because it may not be so obvious when you look at it, like they're getting rid of substitute teachers and certification.
Yes.
And Guadalupe is okay with rescission of 3.10.020.
Okay.
Thank you, Guadalupe. The last one is substitute teachers, 5.30.010. Again, these are covered by the collective bargaining agreement. We have a collective bargaining agreement with the 18-hour substitute teachers.
Didn't we just approve that again?
We did. We did. So, and again, it's either covered by statute and or collective bargaining agreement. This one was last amended in 1995.
Let's see, I graduated from high school.
I don't want to play that game. I would not win that game.
Any questions, Jackson?
No.
Aisley, you're okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 5 policies and committee ready to recommend them all for rescission to the full board,
Yes.
the next meeting. Great, okay. That manual is getting thinner and thinner.
Yes, and just so you know, we're doing the same, working on the same analysis on the administrative directive side, and Rachel's putting together a comprehensive document to be able to track.
I'm working on it now.
Great.
It's a policy tracker. So, I'm not quite finished, but I'm mostly finished, and it has, it's in a spreadsheet, so every tab at the bottom is like section 1 through 8. And then, each policy, has a link to the web page for it with the name, the date of last revision, the department lead, which I'm just kind of using what I used to use for that. It can be flexible. The OSBA recommendation, if any, staff recommendation, whether it's recommended for rescission, and comments. So you'll see it when I'm finished with it, you'll see it, and I think it's really helpful as I'm, typing in these, I'm kind of identifying others that may be able to be rescinded.
So do you think if you're going to be eliminating, you're rescinding administrative directives, are they ones that are connected to the ones that we're rescinding, or is it just a whole other thing?
Well, we
Or
haven't
both.
done any rescissions yet. We're still working to.
Well,
Or what you're
not as part of
contemplating.
this process. There have been some that have been amended or rescinded
Yes.
over the course of the last
Yeah.
2 years.
Well, I'm talking about for
Over
future, are they like those two categories, 2 different categories?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, starting right now, I mean, we're getting organized right now.
Yeah, I think you'll see both, Julia.
You'll see
You'll
both.
see both.
Okay.
Yeah, I have ADs in here too.
So sometimes the rescission of a policy will necessitate the rescission of the AD that implements the thing that isn't needed. Sometimes there's an AD that has some helpful information that needs to be moved to another part of the policy isn't helpful, but there was something right. I mean, I just don't want to oversimplify the categories,
Right.
but I think the work is not surprising.
But- But for the purposes of this discussion, I don't think there are any ADs that go with these that need to be.
Okay, that's what I was kind of thinking, is it was like, okay, so if we rescind a policy and then there's still an AD sitting there.
Right.
I mean, I know we don't have anything to do with it, but just I'm thinking if it's
But
not.
we do, to follow it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, and I'll go through and double check. I'm really, my goal right now is trying to get this linked with the revision dates and like all 8 sections ready to go, and we can go through as many times as we want and, go to
Careful
town.
what you offer.
Well, no, I'm just like,
well, we're kind of lowering our expectations when we get to policy and policies and what we're gonna do. And just on that, do we have, like the way, hi Michelle, hello Michelle, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. I've been listening in.
Oh, great.
I was in a webinar, so you didn't see me.
Okay.
We're just on the end of the rescissions and talking about a little bit more about process. If the substitute teacher had an AD, could we have it now where the link would be on the policy, or do you actually have to look in the book?
it's, the goal is to start doing that. We're gonna start, and we have been doing it,
As we
go.
Okay,
But there are, I think I'll just go out on a limb and say hundreds of policies that,
And AD.
NADs, and some of them are, from 2002, 71. As we move, we will
Two highly productive phases apparently of.
be very highly productive, yes. So, but yeah, that's the goal.
Great, okay, so just as a refresh, Michelle, so if you were listening, I'm not sure when you started listening, but we, had a recommendation to move the indemnification, revision policy amendments out, and now, Liz just went through all the rescissions. And,
Which I did hear.
okay,
the
so we're at the
recitation.
point now where it's, and we just asked whether everybody was okay. Are you okay with us recommending to
And I'm
the,
okay with
perfect, okay.
It's
Great.
almost too easy.
No, that
Maybe
is,
the hard
it's
stuff
just,
is coming up.
it's, there, hopefully nothing is hard.
This,
Uh,
this agenda looks pretty smooth. Hopefully.
Yeah, so, I'm gonna go back to the start of the agenda, just for the brief update, on the student conduct and discipline. And as background for Michelle, oh, were you on the board, Aileen, when it went to first reading?
I don't think so.
Okay, so just as background,
Just, we came in at the tail end of those
Yeah.
discussions.
Well, it's here.
yeah, so what,
You were here with the
We're here as a
student conduct?
student, maybe.
I mean, this happened a long time, this happened a long time ago. I don't know, maybe Liz, you can get the date. So the board identified, the student conduct and discipline.
I think we talked about it my first draft policy, but it had already
It had already gone through the whole process.
yeah.
Anyway, we had a very extensive, and Shanice did a great job, of engaging special ed, families and also,
Sorry. Superintendent shared that link and it just literally started playing by itself.
And not only special ed families, but also, families that represented, students who were overrepresented in, sort of disciplinary measures in the school. And we crafted some pretty significant policy changes. We had a first reading, and then PAT demanded a bargain. Liz, do you have the date when we had that first reading?
Nope, I'm sorry.
But it was a year and a half ago.
Yes, it
Oh,
must,
more
we
than-
must have been on the board when that happened, but it was, yeah.
I don't think so.
I think it was in the fall, at least the fall of 2019. I mean, we were meeting in person when PAT demanded a bargain. So,
I think it was January of 2019, because even the Secretary of State's audit
yeah, it was,
recites
Yeah.
that we had it.
Yeah.
So there was a demand to bargain for PAT, which the board can still adopt a policy.
It was July 16th, 2019.
It's the first reading.
thanks.
Was it- okay.
It's like our second board
Meeting,
meeting. We were
yeah.
like, you know.
The
for a
first
year
or the
and a half,
second? The first.
The first reading wasn't the
There
second
wasn't.
reading.
like, I said the second board meeting, our second board.
Okay,
meeting.
so then 2018. We weren't in, there's a timeline when they demand a bargain. And Liz, you can be more technical than I
Well,
can.
they-
but
there was-
they have demand a bargain, we have a certain amount of time. We can come to an agreement, or at a certain point, the board can just approve the policy.
Right. And we, I don't remember actually all of the interactions with the labor relations team, but it was continued to be pushed out as they were trying to build the time. Is it going to be part of full contract bargaining? Is it going to be part of, it gets pushed back behind emerging issues that are coming up in MOAs or other issues. So then it was going to be part of full contract bargaining. And PPS agreed to that. That's why the time period, the 90 days bargaining period hasn't really been in play. Because we haven't engaged in bargaining, right? We agreed to do it, but we haven't actually done it. And so and then COVID, right? And so all of the things that PPS and PAT were working on, this took a back seat. We also didn't have kids in classrooms, and so it was, I think that's another
There
reason
was
why.
less discipline happening.
Less discipline happening.
Mhm.
And so the current posture is that it has been peeled off from full contract bargaining into a separate interest-based bargaining process. On September 20 and September 27th, there was IBB training with the federal mediator, which is the usual beginning of how the IBB process works.
What is the acronym?
Interest-based bargaining.
Interest-based bargaining.
So it's
IBB.
slightly different than the traditional labor bargaining that tries to align the interests and find common ground in some ways and some additional dynamics. It involves a lot of talking and trying to bring the parties together to align on common interests, as I understand it. I say that I have not actually been in IBB. I have just talked to others who have on some other topics. So there are 5 to 6 sessions scheduled. The first one is October 6th. The agreement is to conclude by November 4th. So that's the current timeline. This implicates not just the policy, but the student handbook and Article 9 of the contract. Right? So there are 3 parts that all touch on some of these same issues.
And I think the language, the agreement language focused more on the handbook and other things versus the policy. As an individual board member, I'm just asking this, that if it looks like something's going to come back that is an agreement that is contrary to something that's in the policy, that before that happens, that there'd be a conversation with the board.
That would be my expectation as well. Because what I have talked about with Genevieve is that the board's direction is set in that policy. That is the articulation of what the board thinks should happen. And if that's not going to be possible, there needs to be a conversation.
Oh, I was going to say, I haven't read through that policy. I vaguely remember when I first started, but I'm really interested in it because its discipline rates disproportionately affect Black and brown students. Everybody knows that, right? And so I want to be sure that we're also aligning. The policy sounds like it's a done deal, but I'm praying it's aligned with our racial equity and social justice policy.
It totally was, which I think is one of the reasons why.
And it's very important because of PAT's involvement in that disciplinary process. They're like first people like starting the process for these Black kids.
Well, I think this is precisely why they asked to have a conversation about it, because it very much was driven by a racial equity policy and conversations with the families of students most often disciplined. That was
Do we
really
have the
the
rate?
focus.
Do we have? I know that our facilitator requested that data. I don't know if he's gotten the disciplinary rates.
We
It's-
haven't collected it actually.
Because we're getting
1920
it.
and 2021. It isn't posted.
The request was for the data from 2016 forward.
Yeah, so we have
So you
the
could see
26,
prior to the COVID.
but we don't have anything after 2018.
Well, I think there's some, I think that, it's when kids are at home, when we went into hybrid, that changed a lot of things, right? It's a different process then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one of the things this student conduct and discipline policy was being formed was the deep work with families that were most directly impacted by it as our beginning conversation, which I thought was really, really important. Think about how do we do things differently. I am struck by something that the superintendent told me about when he was working in another district, that one of the projects he did was identifying, really looking at discipline and discovering that there were some folks who, responded with certain kinds of discipline more often than others, and so that the percentages of teachers that were suspending and expelling kids, it was a small percent. So
Interesting.
that was in that specific district was a specific issue, and they solved a lot of it with professional development. But I think that was part of a cultural shift there as well. So I think what we're trying to do is this culture shift in collaboration with PAT, in collaboration with our families, and that's really the heart of this policy.
And I think
To get to that specific issue about disproportionate discipline.
yes, and I think that is absolutely the goal. And part of some of the levers are some statutory changes, and the policy tends to reflect those. And the standards under Article 9 in the collective bargaining agreement about when students can be excluded from classrooms is one of the heart of the, I mean, there are several issues, but I think that the standard is a very low bar in Article 9 as written. And I think there's a great willingness on the part of PAT to engage in conversation about that, using a racial equity, social justice lens. But I think the work of the IDB process is to figure out to what.
Yeah.
And I don't want to speak on their behalf because I've not been in the room, but I sense, if you look at the Article 9 language, it needs update.
I do think that I've heard from folks that there's some fear about if we don't have the tools in the toolbox, what do we do?
Right.
If a kid is throwing chairs, if a kid is out of control, if we're not suspending or expelling, how do we keep kids safe? So I think those are important conversations to have about how do we, manage classrooms and keep all kids safe. And I think, again, it's that some of it's just a fear response of this is kind of how it's worked well for me as a teacher. But I haven't been in the bargaining either, so I don't actually know. But that's just some of the questions I've heard people say. It's like it's a fear we want to keep our kids safe. We want to keep students focused on learning, and what are the tools to do that effectively?
Right, and how do you minimize the disparate impacts to kids of color? So I have a friend that's a teacher. I've heard about the whole chair throwing, and like she'll stay in a classroom for an hour after work. So all the kids are gone. These are like K-8. So she doesn't get beat up on the way to the car.
So thank you for the update. I would like to request, so I'm gonna have just this as a standing agenda item since
That's helpful.
we just continue to stay abreast. Sounds like there's be hopefully plenty of activity over the next couple meetings. Just a short update, and I'm wondering if it's possible to circulate to everybody on the committee the draft policy. If I would have thought about it, would have.
I was going to say it would be helpful to have that in board docs.
To have the draft policy, but also I'm pretty sure Shanice had her report on community engagement. I mean, she engaged so many.
She did a great job.
So I think it was a report or something.
It might have been like a staff report.
Right,
Yeah.
so can you circulate those two things plus a copy of Article 9 in the current PAT?
Because there's still
budget
actually
document?
an active survey for students.
There is?
Yeah.
Great.
It's pages 32.
Always good to know what's on the website.
That's on
And
page
then
32.
The other thing, just so we all have the same packet, is the link to the webpage with the data that we have, like pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful if we could just have that package of things traveling with the agenda item for every meeting.
So Rachel, if you can gather them and send them to Roseanne.
And hopefully for everybody else, it's just some paper like them. Great, does anybody else have any questions about that policy?
It'll be helpful to get the attachments, these documents.
Okay, I'm gonna do one other housekeeping item, just so I don't forget it. Number 8 is the policies and public comment. Have we had any public comment on the rescissions?
No.
Okay. Great. If we get any, if you just circulate to see whether that generates anybody having a point of view or doing anything different, that'd be great. Just as a general practice. Okay, so item number 4 on the agenda, it's policies and administrative directives, and it's a short policy 1.70.020. And we had a brief conversation about this at the last meeting. But in essence, I'm looking at the policy and the administrative directive. There's a lot of language about policymaking in the administrative directive that really should be in the policy. Liz, I don't know if you want to provide an overview
Yeah,
of the lift and shift
Yeah,
that you did.
I think when you think about policy, the authority, the school board possesses the authority and it decides what to delegate to the superintendent. Right, the statute, all but a few things authority can be delegated from the board to the superintendent. The way the policy and AD were structured, the superintendent was describing policy-making authority of the board in the wrong direction, right? So what we did was we mostly merged the AD into the policy because it didn't really make sense for the superintendent to be defining the policy-making authority of the board. The board instead defines the terms under which it wants to make policy and what it delegates to the superintendent for administrative directive. And so there were also a few inconsistencies to clean up, but that was the shift of why it's now in policy and not AD, and we would eliminate the AD.
Okay.
And put all of the information in one place.
So are the red lines your red lines then?
Yes, they are that reflects all additions to the policy.
The only comment I have on this one was under policy development, and it says proposal for a new policy or change in existing policy shall be made in the form of a policy proposal, and it lists out who can and who, it doesn't say who can't. But when I think about a community member, it makes me wonder if we could, I mean, as I've mentioned earlier today, we have the same people testifying in front of us over and over again, and people that take interest in our meetings and community members. I don't know if they know about this. I mean, it's on the website, but is there some way we could be a governing body of choice, or that actually did a little bit more to let people know that if they had an idea, like it could even be a suggestion box.
I think that's part of the work of the board, right? Like, we're supposed to be the ambassadors for the district. I think that falls squarely on us to engage with our constituents and to encourage people to respond. I mean, that's what I'm hopeful about the Let's Talk app, is that we can help direct people to the right places and help say, you have an idea, great, let's connect and let's further those voices. Because I mean, I get tons of emails from people with lots of ideas. It's just helping channel that into ways that is constructive.
Yeah.
And that's
I
overwhelming.
think the climate justice policy also came from some community voices as well as student and board member and teacher voices, educator voices.
I guess my point is that those people know how to do that. I'm thinking about the people that might not know this.
Yeah, I wonder.
And I agree, Aileen, that we should, but I'm hopeful about that app too.
Well, there's a couple things to maybe.
It was just a comment when I was reading through it.
Okay, if we're going to be having a first reading, later on in the agenda, we're also going to be talking about like how we get the word out. But I mean, this may be like, hey, we're having a first reading of our policy and policies, and it says who can make a policy change. So I think we could use the opportunity to talk about how we make policy as a sharing with people what that is. I mean, a lot of people don't even know that there's a policy.
My husband once had a job title, which was Minister of Emerging Ministries. And so the policy on policies kind of takes me back to those days. Yeah.
Policy. PBOT has a really cool class that they have at Portland State. It's a one-term class, and it's all about how the transportation, like if you want a stop sign on your street, how do you do it? Like, the average person doesn't know how to do it. The class is waitlisted every year. It's been going on for 29 years, and I think of that as that of showing the public how to be, empowering the public basically to participate. When we know that as a government, we know, like, it's on our website. I don't know. I feel like this is just the one comment I had on this particular in our board book that I wondered if we could do better with.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I look at the list and here's what I wonder is like, do we need to list out this, or can we say that it can be made by any individual within the bounds of PPS? Because I mean, I don't know. Is there a reason we list? The list it's just got.
We had a lengthy conversation about this at one point.
I think we talked about it in the context of the complaint policy.
That's what it was.
I think this list comes from,
It's from the previous.
it's from the previous
AD.
AD. And I think the trade-off is simplicity of like any means any, and do people need to see their role identified to know what really needs them? And I'm not sure there's,
I
think-
think it also
I think
says
about-
community member who is also a resident of the district, so that kind of is a catch.
Yeah.
My point is, your average person that doesn't go to our website every day.
I don't even go to our website every day.
I don't either. I mean, I kind of do, but I don't really
I
like
do.
spend 2 hours on
Well,
it.
that's,
But,
that's because you are amazing, Julia.
that, we already know that about you. The question is, yeah, these are all listed, and do the community members that we do not hear from, like Lazy Elliott parents, for instance, King Elementary parents, George School parents, do they see themselves in this? Do they see themselves at all in the MARC policies, but specifically in this one when they could bring a policy proposal?
So one thing you could do is either through Let's Talk. So I was noticing on Let's Talk, it has a connect to the superintendent, but there's no like connect to the school board.
Yeah, we haven't done every school board member. I
Pardon?
think something we a couple school board members. We had, remember we talked to you guys about, yeah, we haven't met with everybody yet too.
Oh, you haven't done everybody yet, okay. But I'm thinking that could be a place where, and same thing with the link on the board page.
Also to propose a policy, that one too.
Propose a policy button?
Or, yeah,
Policy.
policy ideas or feedback of, not so much, feedback on policies or.
Yeah, maybe there's just other
Okay.
places
feedback or
besides,
something. I think you
So I was told when I was working for the Housing Bureau, which has been a little while now, trying to reach immigrant communities. It's like, how do you, it's like, you go to the barber shop, you go to their faith communities. WhatsApp is a app that you can dial internationally with no charge, and that's where a lot of the people I was trying to reach hang out.
oh, I just
I'd
saw
never
it,
heard of it
sorry.
before. Like if your kid goes to overseas, you can use that app, so you're not running up charges.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Anyway, that's what I've seen. More push.
Yeah, no, I think we should brainstorm, and one of the things that Herman and I were talking about, welcome, Director Green, thank you for coming. Sorry, I missed your text, sorry.
I totally apologize.
I didn't see right away.
Traffic is terrible, and this was not the right time to go to Eugene. And try to think you can get to Eugene and get right back. Yeah,
It's Los Angeles.
I didn't think that one all the way through.
But hopefully in addition to our policymaking, that we'd also have an opportunity to like talk about how we do it, like what some policies are, even if we're not gonna change them, just as a education, awareness. So just real quick, so that you know where we are on the agenda, we have made a recommendation on the rescissions, which were pretty straightforward, to move them from first reading to the full board. We also had a recommendation to move the indemnification policy amendments to the full board. We had an update on the student conduct and discipline policy, which has been sitting in first reading mode for over a year. But the good news is we're going to circulate some information about it. So, and then for the next couple of meetings, have it just as a standing agenda item to update us, because it has really important implications for student discipline. So more to come on that. And then we are right now just in the midst of talking about the policy on policy, which on the agenda item, it is item number 4. So that's where we're at. So we just kind of, Liz was providing an explanation of the policy and show how to really. I was wondering also, once we get the policy manual done, is it possible, and then we're on a cadence of maybe we're only updating, policy maybe once every 6 weeks, to get our policy manual translated? It's always only just been in
Speaking of
English.
last night,
it needs to be translated online. It needs to have the same functionality that the website does, and I just don't, I don't know the mechanics of that. it's the way I think the text is posted online, so we need to solve that.
Yeah.
In whatever form it is, and it's not, I think it's not about, my understanding of how our website is translated is that it's translated in real time, and I might be wrong about this, so this is some old information. So it's changing how the text appears so that the translation function
Oh,
works with
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This
So
is
it
not my,
applies to the links, basically.
Yeah.
this is not my native language technology description. I think I understand it, and I have a very hard time.
I'm
So,
impressed
yeah.
with everything so far, Liz, that you.
Yeah, so I think that is a high priority and perhaps not even, I think it's more about the structure of the website than it is about updating the policies.
Yeah, because I was thinking like,
Because they're never gonna be fully, I mean, there's always,
there's gonna be
It's a
one
dynamic,
big
yeah.
push through or getting it right, and then it seems like after that, it's not like we're changing policies every day. I mean, it's maybe every other month.
See, we're looking at 1971, so let's add.
Well, I just think it'd be an important thing to do, because like, I don't know why only people who have English as their
so Rachel.
native
you
language
talked
get
about
access to the policy manual.
Because that's the way it is.
It's the way it's always been.
No, that's a really good point. I know Google has a translate function, and Google, on some web pages, you can translate to different languages.
That's what,
Rachel's gonna take the lead in working
that's
with
what,
I
the
know,
comms team, including my
but is our
team, to
website,
find out what the technical requirements are.
the board website uses that
Right.
function. It's embedded in the law.
that's what I was wondering.
Right.
Well, that'd be great if the next meeting Rachel came and said it's already happening.
Leaf was the one that was instrumental in getting that search function in, done in the policies, and then he was the one that worked on that whole technical piece of.
Yeah, that was a different, I mean, I think the question here is, what does the website do?
Yeah.
Right, not, we can look at policy, but what does the website?
It's how to get the policy content
Into the.
into the rest of the website where the translation function is embedded. And right now
Oh,
it
'cause
sits
it's not.
separate, it
It's
sits
like a-
separately with
so
these
separately.
links and documents, and that's, I think this is a functional issue that we should be able
That's why
to.
Leaf is a person.
Because it's PDF versus like a,
You're
I
gonna
think I'm
quickly get to
tracking
you're gonna get to an area that I won't be able to confirm or deny, but I think
I do
this
think
is,
that we've reached the point of like, we wanna make it available in all languages on the website.
and Rachel's gonna go find out how to do that.
Yes.
okay.
I'm gonna ask someone else to, because I'm in
Yeah.
the legal department.
All out of our lanes.
Yeah. There's a whole group of people in the basement that I think might be able to help.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think this would be a great achievement
Yes, I
to
agree.
have done, is to have
Yes.
our policies
Available.
and accessible to families.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a really great idea. I also just want to caution us that sometimes these translators, you can get you can get the word translated into Chuckies, which only the king speaks, or you can hire someone to make sure. I went through a whole translation exercise around the housing bond, and the term housing bond is not translatable. It's like you're getting like housing glue. And
Ah,
a lot of the
there you go.
cultural, so
Right.
the cultural pieces, not every country or every culture has a housing bond. So it's, or a mechanism even to fund housing. So how do you describe it
What
in
this
a
thing
way
is.
that's usable to the people that are reading it?
And I know for like a lot of the Latino families that we work with, I did a very good job of being terrible because I used Google Translate in Spanish to translate a lot of our literature for stuff that we wanted to do for the communities in Spanish, and I used Google Translate, and I went through and word for word, I was doing my very best. And it turned out terrible. And they told me, Pastor Herman, this is terrible. Who translated this for you? I said, I did. I used Google Translate and I used Spanish, and I went through and I made everything this and the graphics, and I pulled them over, and there's like, thank you so much for thinking about us. Next time, let me read it first, because this is terrible. So I did a great job of being terrible.
Well, you only did it once, so
It's even worse for Chinese. Yeah.
yeah.
So I just want to caution us in that,
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So,
It's just something to think
It's gonna
about.
find a ritual.
yeah, no, so Rachel's just gonna go find all the problems, because if that's a problem just for policies, it's gonna be a problem for other parts of our website.
It's also this education, if there's like how we speak English in business versus at home, versus like some communities have only a very small percentage that actually read and write the language. There's also the whole education difference. And so I've ended up hiring people that are kind of middle of the road, like you don't necessarily have to have a lot of college, but what is everybody speaking? Like when you go to your grandma's house, how's that? And that's the translation we use. It's like the 5th grade.
Yeah.
Level.
Well, okay, I think I want to aspire to more than 5th grade, but,
I'm not sure you
But
do,
this is
actually.
because we're
I'm not
understandable
sure you do
language.
want to aspire more than 5th grade. I think the simpler the language.
well, I was gonna say, we're lay people, so it's gonna be, it should be understandable, I mean, it should be translatable, because it
So
shouldn't have a lot of
everyday
technical
person,
terms.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
We should be doing that already in English. And we're
Right.
doing that.
Yes,
That was my
yeah.
point.
I don't think, I think this hits like college level, if not higher in turn. I mean, I look at appoint an advisory committee soliciting the views of persons representing the interests of those likely to be affected by the, I mean, that's not a simple sentence. Those are not.
Yeah, you can use the, Word has a function that will tell you what the grade level is and the reading, which complete scale.
Well, I was afraid to look at that.
Yeah.
So great point, thank you for raising that. One question I had was, and I know I asked this before, but in 4, okay, it's Roman numeral 4, no, I'm sorry, it's Roman numeral 5, 1B, where it takes out the second reading. That comment, second reading shall include a discussion of the comments of staff, and the public, and any substantive changes made in policies since the first reading, which I think is just a good practice. Did you take it out, not because it's not a practice, but just because
It
it's
seemed
like
highly
a level of
prescriptive
detail?
of the board to order itself to do that, but it's not because it's a bad practice. So
Okay,
I think it's at the board, if the board would like it, if the committee would like it restored, we can do that.
I don't feel strongly about it, I just want to know.
I would also go back to something I just noticed sitting here in Roman numeral 4, section 2B as in boy. We say especially from families and communities who have historically been underrepresented, and I think we, at the retreat, talked about not putting historically in as a modifier.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, where are you?
Roman numeral 4,
Point B.
2B as in boy.
So what if we said especially from families and community members who have been and are underrepresented? Because I don't know that unrepresented is, I think underrepresented in district policy.
I think that's how I've seen it before,
Does
yeah.
that work for everybody?
Underrepresented.
Because we say underserved,
I think
Underrepresented.
underrepresented. Take out historically.
say have been and are, so it's
And are.
both in the past and current.
Currently, yes,
Underrepresented in district policy.
Okay, good.
Man, we're on a roll.
So then we can turn to B.
You got my
We just one
grandma,
Oh, you said, we're saying.
have been and are,
Okay.
happened.
so both then and now.
Okay,
Unrepresented is changed to underrepresented.
I also had a question about like a policy proposal, like what is incorporated in like that? So we're asking them to provide a policy proposal, what are we asking them to propose basically? Like if they have an idea, what do they need to bring to the board?
Oh, yeah.
I think we tried to not make it too, I think we actually deleted some of the AD, if I'm remembering correctly. I think the idea was to make it accessible and not overly precise. It doesn't have to be on a certain, it can be an email, it can be submitted to Roseanne, it could come to the superintendent, it could come to the board. So there were some other rules that were pretty restrictive. I think we'd like people, I think, to be able to say, I think we should have a policy that promotes or prohibits idea X. They don't really have to write it all out even. I don't think we have to put the burden on them to draft the policy. It could just be an idea, or it could be like the climate crisis response policy. It could be a whole full-blown, here's the language. I think we want to give people room to flex that is how this was drafted, but again, it's the committee to
I
decide.
think Jackson's point is, and I agree with it, is it makes it sound like it's a thing. Like in the form of a policy proposal, like that there's something that is.
For the policy idea.
And it also says a policy proposal may be made on, so you have to create this as well, instead of just sending.
Yeah, I think we should make that clear. I think we want to make it
Let's see, like,
Yes.
so it could be, a proposal, a new policy or exchange in existing policy may be made by, can we just take out that
Yep.
whole shall be in the form of
Yep,
policy proposal?
yep. I like it.
Great. Anything else, in section 4?
Well, that's it. So, a proposal for a new policy or a change in existing policy
May be made by,
may be made by, okay. And then for number 2, when a policy proposal is received by the board. Are we keeping that?
Yeah, because I think, or you could just, take the language of when a new policy, proposal for a new policy or a change in this policy is received by the board. So you could almost take the language from
Yeah.
1 and just bring it down.
I like that.
Does that make sense? Liz?
I understand what you're asking.
Okay. Anything else in 4 or 5?
We just used policy proposal a few times, so just so I can clear that up.
For what?
We used policy proposal a few times throughout number 4.
But I think it's under.
Yeah.
I think when it's in a sub A, B, C, and D, you can
Yeah.
short circuit it.
Okay, this is somewhat of a nuance, but under D and then there's A, B, C, and D.
Is this 5?
Yeah, that's,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
1
should be
and then
one.
A and then A, B, C and then B,
Yeah.
A, B, C, D, E.
yeah.
That wasn't gonna be my point, but it does anything for me.
I'm so, yeah, I just am tracking with you. Where are we?
Yeah, so, one of the things is, it doesn't just say, do nothing. That's not an option, which I think should be. Because,
For which one?
The board may approve, like, under at the second reading, what we may do.
yeah, because that's D, which is defer, but that implies that you're going to do something, and then E is reject. And,
You could technically, I mean, what did we do with the student conduct? Did we just defer indefinitely?
well, no, it's still waiting.
Is it still technically under first reading?
What I think
It's
this is,
deferred for further action.
I think this is more, say a community member sends in an idea that is not really a policy.
It's like an
Well,
operational.
how did we get to second reading then?
No,
It's a bad idea.
that actually is a policy.
Okay, so I'm not on the same place as you.
Yeah,
Where are you, Julia?
I'm on, stereophonic.
Yeah.
Roman numeral 5. 1.
Yeah.
D,
Right.
and then there's, at the time of the second reading, the board may take one of the following actions.
At the time of the second
Second
reading, though,
reading.
that's when it's already a policy that
Well,
we've
it's already
brought
been-
from committee and had a first reading on.
So you're talking about what happens with just the general proposal slash idea.
Just because someone has an idea doesn't mean it gets to second reading. I think that's what you're saying, Julia, is if we get an idea,
Well,
We
it
don't
says
have to-
take no further action on policy proposal, right?
Yeah, I guess,
I mean, we could receive it and then just say, thank you for your recommendation.
Well, that's 2D.
I mean, in
Yeah.
the legislature, what you do is you send it back to committee. Like, you don't want to reject it, or you're not wanting to promise a future vote, but it's like, send it back to committee for.
I feel like we're talking about two different.
I think we're talking about 2 different. So Julia, look at 2D and compare that to 1D. See if we solve the problem.
Okay, it's 5(1)D where it says at the time of the second reading, the board may take one of the following actions.
Yes. And 4(2)D is take no further action on the policy.
So at the time of the second reading, the board may take the following
Okay, so the second reading means that it's a policy, we've made a policy, we've brought it to the whole board, we've brought it for a first reading,
Yes.
Right.
and now we're at the second reading, and you wanna add take no action?
Well, I'm gonna revise that. I would say like resend it, like send it back to committee. Which is a really pretty common thing. It's like, oh, like we found out through public comment that it has a like major flaw.
So just
Well,
rephrase.
wouldn't that be for deferring it for further discussion or action?
Or additional person.
I don't know, sometimes things just go to committee to die.
Or, well, I think that's where it goes, the or discussion. You can bring
Yeah.
it to the committee and it can die in discussion at the committee. I think
Okay.
it's covered
So-
underneath the options there, but
Would you guys read it that is broad enough, D is broad enough that, so a bunch of comment comes in, it's like, oh, this thing has more problems than we thought. And the chair says, we're gonna send it back to committee for further discussion.
Yeah.
Then that would fit under D,
yeah,
not necessarily like a promise that the board is gonna like bring it up again,
Mhm.
but it's gonna go
It
back.
would go back to the
So if
committee.
you guys think that that is within the realm,
yeah.
I think it's within the realm, and I think we also, it's curious to have the board constrain its own authority to take action. If we think that we are creating too tight a box around the board's own authority, you might want to, the board has plenary authority here, right? This is to provide guidance to other people about how the process works, not to limit what the board can do.
well, then maybe it's the lead-in, that the time of the second reading, the board can take,
May.
May take.
may take a variety of actions, including, and that gives you the greatest flexibility. But
Does the fact
How
that
about
it's
May-
just one of the
How
following?
about we just say may take the following actions?
yeah, that's,
Mhm.
okay, and if you guys think D includes the other one, anything under 6 or 7?
I just had a question around, as we look through policies, I remember at the beginning of last year, we talked about how every proposal would be attached to the RESJ lens and making sure that staff ran through those 6 questions with every policy before we came to committee with it. That wasn't always the case. I'm just wondering if that would belong in the policy or if that's what that is.
Well, and that, so city council, when you recommend, when there's policy making, there's a checkbox that asks for racial equity implications and climate implications. Just to assure that you can check, yeah, we've done our community engagement, or
I think
these are
that's
the
on the
kind of.
staff report. that
On the
goes
staff
with
report.
with the policies as they are moving through for board approval. That's a section in the staff report that is filled out. That may not fully answer your question, but it is part of the process.
And before the staff report part of the process, which is at the end, and it's a staff report to you, here's what we've done, is the planning process, which is community engagement, completing a racial equity lens worksheet.
Okay,
So, and I realize now, because you're new to this committee, I can send you links to the user guide to writing policies that I developed
Great.
last year along with Shanice and Danny.
excellent, yeah.
It'd be great to send it to folks.
So I'll
Would it be something that, okay, if we're saying it's not just staff, because there was this perception that, like, from some people, like, hey, only staff can draft policy.
Well, that was my question.
And if, like, everybody, right, so if everybody can drafted, would it be helpful for that to be like more open source so other people could see how you do it?
Well, I think, yeah, in line with that, I think my question around the policy proposal was are we requiring them to go through the user guide, go through the racial equity lens,
Not-
which we're not doing.
well,
We're just learning.
I think the racial equity lens is considered something that we should have present all the time. I would not require all policies to go through the full user guide because we have some legislative requirements that you have to change, or we're rescinding policies. I mean, the user guide is designed to have some flexibility in it too, to flex for more complex policies that impact larger number of people and to be a smaller process when it's a more contained subject matter, expense reports or P card approval, I'm making those up. But
Yeah,
there are some that affect all students and some that affect a narrow group of staff on the administrative level and everything in between.
and it was primarily developed, for staff who was saying, I don't know what to do. How do I write a policy? How do I revise this AD? So it's a guide where
It's amazing.
clearly a lot of policies or ADs would need to be thoroughly vetted, thought
Rewritten.
about. Yeah, I mean, like
Think
the
about
whole,
unintended consequences.
everything, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, like we had an AD this summer that came through that was a minor P card saying, they're not gonna go through this big giant process. Like, it's meant to guide people, like, where do I start? What do I do? How do I go about this? Because in the past, nobody had a guide. They would just, talk to someone in the hall and say, hey, I'm thinking about revising this. What do I,
Yeah.
If you want to
I think it'd be
recirculate it
helpful
to
to-
all of the committee
I will,
members,
I will.
and then that there's a point of reference.
Yeah.
I think we want it to be the policy people, it be as accessible as possible, which allows somebody to just send an email. And that could be a policy proposal, or they could, if they were more ambitious, not more ambitious, that's the wrong term, but if they wanted to try and use the guidelines, that they'd at least be available.
Okay, so like say, Julie, you would receive an email saying, I would like this to be deleted from this policy. Would it be your responsibility to say, yes, we'll look into that, or no, we're not going to look into that, as like chair of the committee?
So I think it would depend, it's a little bit hard because I don't think I've gotten any things like that. Well, I actually have a couple, but I would say it's like, okay, you have to demonstrate that it actually is a policy versus like you're trying to direct some sort of operational thing, because that's what they are a lot of times. If it was a policy, generally I'd say, the chair would bring it to the committee. It's like, do we want to, well, first of all, do you have room on the agenda? And does the committee want to prioritize that as something to work on? I mean, for example, the climate policy is a good example of the community bringing forth something that got on the agenda last year. Another example is like the whole foundation and paying for FTE is another one. But it doesn't have to come in policy, and then it's a little bit, do you have time? And this will be a year in which we have fewer legislative mandates to change things. So there's more agenda type, like last year we had a lot of things we had to do, and we have fewer this time. Anything under 7, 8, 9?
Just calling out that we're saying we're gonna review every policy every 4 years, and then every policy, like every 1 or 2 sections of a policy every
What number is that again?
7, 2.
I think we changed to strive.
It does say strive to. That was a good call. It does say that.
I think one of the questions too is it says the board shall. And we might want to talk about what that means. means in terms of, that sounds like the full board, maybe delegated to the policy committee. Is that, do you want staff to present now? I mean, I just, again, you are ordering yourselves to do something, striving to do something. And maybe that's good enough. I just think about how you want to talk
first of
about
all,
yourself in that
we
way.
don't need to call out one policy. That's a fix.
Yeah.
Including that
The policy and policy.
Yeah, I don't think we need that. That's an old.
Can we do something about 8.3? It's just a super clunky sentence.
I'm sorry, which?
8.3. The superintendent or designee shall notify board members upon issuance of an administrative director that a new or revised directive has been posted to the district's website.
Issuance of.
It feels like there's two
revised
sentences there.
Administrative directive.
It also isn't at fifth grade level.
No, I think all the words are technically fifth grade vocabulary. I think it's just they're slightly awkward
There's
all
too many of
together.
them.
Yeah.
It should just be, shall notify board members that
Upon issuance of a
a new administrative director has been,
Get rid of the first administrative.
Sounds like the
directive.
British Parliament or something.
I think the second half of the sentence can go. Superintendent or designee shall notify board members upon issuance of an administrative directive, period.
that works for me. Got that?
I
Work
would,
for everybody else?
I would say the superintendent designee shall notify board members that a new or revised directive has been issued. Is that
Perfect.
okay? Issuance of is a little
Yes.
formalistic.
Yes. Thank you, Liz, for making it even simpler.
So can I go back to 7?
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. Back to 7.2. I think we could change it to the board or board committee. And then shall strive to review. How about?
Do we review it or do we work with our staff? I mean, are we the ones actually reviewing it or is it like when we ask Liz to, that's my question is this,
Yeah, that's
it's
okay.
not that we
I
should
also
direct
think
staff to do the work.
When we have this document that Rachel is creating, it helps satisfy that. It's one of the
Okay.
things, so we can
Great.
walk through. You may not review every word of every policy.
I mean,
in
I'm
a
sure
section.
Julia
You can-
does, but the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean,
The
but
average.
I would want to be like, okay, we have like this 2 pages, you can, like, staff is recommending, it's,
Yeah.
doesn't need to be changed, and everybody can individually decide whether they want to read it or not, and whether they agree.
Well, I like the every 4 years, because then every board member will have view over the entire policy book by the end of the year.
I will say it is doable, because in, like, coming out of the worst recession, the biggest system nightmare in the last 25 years, the board still did that in 2002 to 2004.
But in 2005, you enacted dozens of new policies that then are subject to review. I mean, you expanded the policy manual in 2000, or whoever did in 2005, expanded that policy manual greatly. We see it all over. So there's more volume to review. I just
But
want
we
to say,
also got rid of a lot of stuff.
fair enough. Yeah.
And we're getting rid of stuff.
We're getting rid of stuff
Right.
in the moment.
So I do think it's doable, but you have, there needs to be like a process you go through,
Well,
and
also, once we do all this wholesale revisement, hopefully every 4 years, it isn't as big of changes.
right, you're not going back to 1971 or 2002. Anything else, Herman, anything do you have
No.
questions about, or,
Right now, I'm just reading a lot.
okay?
Y'all are doing just fine, thank y'all.
Are we, with the changes that we discussed, are we good to, refer this to the board for a first reading?
You can-
Herman? You good?
I am.
Okay, so, another one. The last policy we have before us is, and we have the initial policies that we have, before us. We had a brief discussion of this, this is the last committee meeting. We have a, policy, 5.70.052, which was amended in, adopted in 1971.
Wasn't born yet.
What's the name of the policy?
Is that the work year vacation?
Actually, Liz, I think
the wrong one got
I
amended.
think the wrong
Is the
one.
entire thing red line?
No,
Oh, no, there's a paragraph at the top, okay.
there's
No,
a,
there's a text,
there's a slight mistake. So
the text got put in the wrong policy.
I just noticed that. So
Yeah.
if, first of all, if you look at, pull
Are
out,
we looking at 5.70052?
That's the.
Yeah, but
And,
it's
and
actually-
next is 031, so look at them side by
okay,
side.
so everybody, if you look first at 5.60.031. That is an existing vacation policy.
Okay, that's the
I'm
current
looking at,
schedule.
I need help finding what I'm looking at. I'm
It's
not
vacation
following.
And board books?
eligibility.
I'm in board books. What's the name of the?
It's vacation eligibility and scheduling.
Okay,
okay,
is that at the top?
Now it's closer to the.
No, that's okay. I found it. I don't know where I was. I found.
Okay, so
Here it is.
what we're gonna be doing is,
We kind of jumped around the agenda, Michelle.
Yeah, I
because
know.
you were-
Julia said to
yeah.
accommodate because I was late, and I appreciate that. Thank you, but yeah, no.
That's why it's kind of confusing
Ping
where we
pong.
are on the agenda.
okay, maybe I'll just like a big picture before anybody looks at any numbers. Essentially, what we have in board books is two policies around vacations. One policy around holidays for teachers, and we have one practice. And the practice is actually what we do now. So if you've worked for the district for 6 years, you get X number of days. If you've worked for 10 years, you get X number of days. So currently, we're not following either of the vacation practices. We are actually following a HR created document. So then there's this other thing about holidays that really doesn't really apply to teachers because
Bargaining.
it's already in bargaining. So,
Was that the religious holidays though?
yeah, but it's taken care of with teachers in the CBA.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so what we're doing is so you have these policies. One of the policies that we're not following, the vacation policies, and that's the 5.60.031, is mentioned in the administrator's terms of employment that we talked about last night, okay? And we actually waived that as part of the suspension last night. So we want to keep 5.60.31 as the anchor policy, and we're going to get rid of the other ones, okay?
The vacation, eligibility, and scheduling.
Yes, so we're going to keep that.
Keeping that one with the text from 5.7.
Yes.
So we're gonna keep 5.60.031, but we're gonna use the text that's in 5.70.05.
Yeah, that was just a
Just,
That's
Oh,
a
yeah,
mistake.
cut and paste in the wrong place. Totally understandable.
So,
Just making sure I think that's just what Jackson said, but I wanna say it.
I don't think I told Mary which policy to put it in, and Julia and I had talked about that, and I don't think I relayed that, so I want to apologize for, I should have given her
what
direction.
the committee would be recommending is to rescind 5.70.052.
Work your vacations.
Right. And we'd also be recommending rescinding the, what's the teacher holiday one?
5.50.06.
Thank you. And then taking our new policy and putting it in the 5.60.31.
So
And that
delete,
language, as you'll see, is very efficient. So the new, and this is, we should emphasize, this is just for non-represented employees.
yes,
Okay? So the new language would be at the top of, again, it's just in the wrong, just
The numbers.
pasted in the wrong piece. But the new language for vacation and district holidays for non-represented employees, the superintendent should develop a vacation accrual schedule applicable to non-represented employees to be approved by the Board of Education in the form of the resolution. The vacation accrual schedule will include the annual limit on accrued vacation that can be carried forward. And we'll talk about timing in just a minute. Once approved, the schedule will be posted on the district website. Modifications to the schedule will be approved by the board. The board shall also approve by resolution the addition of any paid holidays for non-represented employees. Approved paid holidays should be posted on the district website. So essentially, it creates a process by which the superintendent is making a recommendation and the board approves it, but you're not listing in policy, like, if you've been at the district 1 to 4 years, you get 10 days or
Right.
6.7 hours.
So again, it gives more authority, but it also it continues the board's accountability.
Right, and then you can see it, so if there's changes, like a holiday being
We don't
added.
have to rewrite policy every time there's a change, but the
Yes,
board
which
still
is-
is approving the changes.
Exactly how you should create policy.
No, I just found the pages. I should have printed this out. Now it's the way everybody had to print it, because trying to tab through each one of these is dumb.
I know.
But I got
I'm a paper person.
I like my paper too.
I apologize, I didn't notice the, I should print this out.
But we're
I should have
saving
got
the
it.
trees.
Only you guys are.
it. She said that.
Oh.
You
got
want a
lot of work
tester?
to do.
You can ask her what happened in a board meeting in 2004.
You got a lot of work to do, Jackson. You keep doing what you do.
So this would be taking a practice, 3 policies, and essentially taking all that language away and putting a new, more, the right level of policy language in one of the existing policies.
So rescinding the religious holidays also, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And work year vacations, but keeping 5.60.031, but calling it vacations and district holidays, parentheses, non-representative.
Correct.
So I think we can, to summarize, the only thing that survives is this language under the right number.
Correct.
And is this language okay?
I really appreciate this, like
Yeah.
it gets to what,
Yeah.
it's that streamlining, but not giving up any of the accountability piece.
Right, and
So
it's,
our fiduciary responsibility, yeah.
right, so in essence, assuming this, if it's not gonna change all the time, once the board approves of a resolution, it just exists, and only if there's a change do you go back and have that. But you don't have to, if you wanna, you don't have to have a really complicated, you don't have to have a policy-making process to say you get an additional holiday or whatever. So the one issue that we weren't sure about, and it's the into a new fiscal year. Liz, do you have clarity? The question was, ordinarily, when you talk about accruals, and this is where some public institutions get caught up, is they end up having over generous accrual, that you, like, somebody has,
A full year.
50 weeks of vacation accrued. So almost all entities, just best good practice, has some sort
Running
of.
in the 90s, baby. Where my dad worked.
Right.
So the question was, what is the endpoint for the accrual? So if you're able to carry, currently, if you look at what the practice is, you can carry 2 years, you can carry your vacation for 2 years. And the question is it like your date of employment or is it by fiscal year?
I think ending it like July is kind of hard around like taking vacation during the summer, in my mind.
But you will have had all,
Sure.
I'm going to suggest that we try to document whatever the current practice is, and I just texted Stacy to find out. I'm sorry, I didn't do that. Shifting that right now is this is,
what is the current practice?
I don't know.
I don't feel
Well,
strongly.
and I think this is, that I think should also be part of what the superintendent comes forward in the resolution, right? That should be in the resolution along with the schedule, what the accrual period is.
Okay, so that actually is a great point, because I think all we have to do is like the vacation accrual to include the annual limit of accrued vacation that can be carried forward, period.
Period, and then
Yep.
not put into a new fiscal year,
So,
and then it's in the resolution itself, and we don't. And so then we can go with whatever the best practices are, which again may change.
so this says the number of days carried over at the end of each fiscal year shall not exceed 2 years accrual allowance.
But I
Right,
think we take fiscal year out.
We don't even need that though,
No, that's in
because
practice.
we're just saying this, what the superintendent brings has to have some sort of accrual
Limit.
limit,
Yes.
We're
right?
not saying
Yes.
what the year limit is.
That actually is a really, is that
Sometimes,
worthless?
sometimes I'm
So we
working
just
with Valerie.
delete the parenthetical then?
Brownies
Yes,
and
we just end that carried forward.
Perfect.
I heard my Subway sandwich last night.
Any other discussion about that?
No, this is so great. That's a good way to do that.
I hope every meeting is like this.
I know,
Um,
I do too.
Okay, so, with that change, are people ready to, send that to?
Yeah, so we'll do rescissions of all the other policies,
Yes.
right?
The one other policy, relating to vacation and the, holiday one.
Oh, yeah, it's just the non-rep vacation policy is also listed there. So we'll rescind 3 and modify 1. Perfect.
Feels so efficient tonight.
I know.
Okay, so one thing I would say is, that I would ask is, that if we're sending them to the board meeting for first reading, let's see, those aren't, there's no public comment around that.
No.
First reading, okay, so it's just
Just
a,
informational. Well, actually, isn't there a policy we just read that had to do with the process of, like, what the first reading was?
yeah, I'm just
What's
trying to think about what it
included, and
means
then
in the
there's-
meeting, because
And
it's,
then there would be a comment period, right, for 21 days?
yeah, I was just gonna say, as we get more policies, first and second readings, is, if we don't do the first reading, like, hey, the schedule got overbooked or something, because like, if you remember, I was like, we gotta do those 3.
Yes.
It'll just take 2 minutes. When we get to second readings, I guess one of the things I just want to emphasize is we should be thoughtful about when it's on the agenda, because if somebody comes to, people come in and want to testify and then we like kick it to another meeting, it just makes sense of wrong message around community engagement. But since these are all first readings,
I think doing it after public comment makes sense.
versus at the end of the meeting,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rosa.
I would say it just depends on the meeting, but
depends on what.
it might depend on what the meeting is like. I mean, if
Yeah.
if there's an item that's very school facing, maybe a lot of community members and families want to attend,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an administrative policy for closing, I think about when families not going to be in the audience bedtime, so.
Yeah, I think every time we've tried to set a strict place for a type of agenda item, then it's all relative to what else is on the agenda. And because we have public comment on on multiple matters that are being voted on. So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind and not always just put them at the end either, but to think about higher volume pieces earlier. in the
Yeah, so
agenda.
if I were looking at these ones, I would say, with the exception of the policy one, potentially just as a way to elevate it, but the rest are kind of like probably fine to be at the end of the
Yeah.
meeting. But things like, the complaint policy, the climate policy, I mean, those things,
Conduct.
pardon?
No, student conduct.
Conduct
Yeah.
of business. Yep.
It's a great thing.
Yeah, that one's,
Okay,
well, I think again, is it administrative or staff centered or is it student centered? Helps us kind of
Yeah.
think about how we
That's it,
wanna elevate those things.
or we're community facing, it's like some of
Yeah.
these are like more internal facing.
Mhm.
Important work, but just maybe not for prime time.
They won't think so.
Yeah, it's always, yeah,
They would be like, please, move this along. I'm ready to complain.
Trying to, plan a public meeting, like, we're gonna share our new housing policy with you, and like expecting the doors to be like bursting open with people. We're like, no, we actually want affordable housing.
I'm waiting for the
The
day
policy.
when we have our meeting and everybody in there is just there just to say, we love you.
It has happened.
I want that meeting. That's the one I'm.
Yes, I want that meeting.
Nobody in there is going to be complaining. Every single person there is just going to be there to say,
There are a
Yeah.
couple times, I think there were at least 2 times when I was there where there was no public comment.
oh,
And I'm like,
Really?
where's everyone?
There was a pandemic, just saying.
I'm online,
It's not to rain on the parade.
Well, when we did the Kairos lease, I don't think there was any data.
That was all positive. And the same as Albina.
that was
The Albina.
that was a good one.
We had like 300 people come up for my first meeting.
Wow.
It was the,
Pioneer? Or
no,
was
it
like-
was, that was later. It was the teachers, the contract.
Oh, was that when we almost had a strike?
No, but they've been in, negotiations for like 14 months or something.
Mm.
Or like 3 years ago during, when we like switched Rosa Parks from the year-long schedule.
Yeah, that was
That was a huge.
turnout.
Okay, so we don't have any public comment, and, is there any other business that anybody wants to raise? I will admit that I, think I told everybody I'd come with a draft work plan, and we're still getting, in place, just a rhythm of how we do our work, so, that didn't happen, but I think everybody got the materials on Friday before. So we'll keep that cadence and,
That's I just can't believe it's early, like, it's almost.
And we started
what would you like to talk about?
Yeah, for the kids.
Well, so noted and very efficient, so, I appreciate everybody like coming prepared, having looked through the materials and, offering some great suggestions, asking questions, and bodes well for our work ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna adjourn the meeting.
Michelle, can I borrow you?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.